Everyone, welcome to This Explainer. The American Civil War didn't just erupt out of nowhere in the 1860s. It was the explosive, inevitable result of decades of deeply ingrained clashes over human rights, labor, and geography. Today, we're unpacking how two incredibly powerful colliding forces, the relentless westward expansion of United States territory and the booming, highly profitable Southern cotton economy, turned the nation into a literal powder keg.
Let's kick things off with a fiery quote from abolitionist John Brown. "It is better that a score of bad men should die than that one man who came here to make Kansas a free state should be driven out." That immediately sets the life-or-death stakes we're dealing with here. By 1856, the debate over whether new American territories would be free or enslaved wasn't just some polite political disagreement happening in the halls of Congress anymore. Partisans on both sides of the divide were quite literally willing to kill each other over it, rhetoric that would eventually escalate into Brown's own full-blown armed insurrection at Harper's Ferry.
So, here's our roadmap for today's explainer. We'll cover 1. The Cotton Kingdom, 2. Marching westward, 3. The fracturing compromises, 4. Radicals and rebellions, and finally, 5. The Union dissolved.
Section 1. The Cotton Kingdom, White Gold and Human Bondage.
We've got to begin with our first real engine of conflict, and that's the explosive economic growth of the southern states. To truly understand the lead-up to the Civil War, we have to look at the bedrock of the American economy at the time. Right after the American Revolution, a lot of leaders actually assumed slavery was just going to slowly fade away on its own. They thought it was becoming obsolete. But then came Eli Whitney's 1794 cotton gin. This single invention made short staple cotton fantastically profitable, and it completely crushed any early hopes that slavery might just disappear. Mountains of what they called white gold began flowing out of the South to feed a seemingly insatiable global industrial appetite, sealing the fate of millions of enslaved individuals who were forced to cultivate it.
And the stark cause and effect of the Southern economy here is just undeniable. Cotton production absolutely skyrocketed from practically nothing in 1790 to billions of pounds by the late 1850s. At the exact same time, that insatiable demand for cotton directly fueled a massive, forced expansion of the enslaved population. We're talking about a jump from just under 700,000 people in 1790 to nearly 4 million by 1860. The American economy was entirely built on the production and export of slave-grown cotton. It was a wildly profitable system, and Southern planters were absolutely not going to let it go.
Section 2. Marching Westward, Manifest Destiny.
Now let's shift to the second parallel engine driving the nation toward conflict, the relentless march of American borders out west. As the population grew and that cotton economy demanded more and more land, the United States aggressively expanded its footprint. Early agreements like the 1819 Adams-Onis Treaty paved the way. It settled borders with New Spain and transferred Florida to the U.S. But as white Americans pushed into the Mississippi Valley and beyond, it immediately sparked fierce debates. The fundamental question was this: would these massive new lands be populated by independent free white farmers or by plantation masters and their enslaved laborers?
This expansionist drive actually spilled right over international borders. Throughout the 1820s and 30s, a massive flow of American settlers, many bringing enslaved laborers with them to grow cotton, illegally crossed into the Mexican province of Tejas. This blatant disregard for Mexican laws, especially Mexico's efforts to halt the expansion of slavery, led directly to the 1836 rebellion. For a decade after that, Texas existed as the independent Lone Star Republic before its highly controversial annexation by the United States.
Just think about this massive, rapid, territorial acquisition for a second. From the Louisiana Purchase, doubling the country's size, all the way to the 1848 Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo, where the U.S. acquired 55% of Mexico's territory through war. But here's the catch. All this land acted like a political poison. The philosopher Ralph Waldo Emerson warned that conquering Mexico would be like swallowing arsenic, and honestly, he hit the nail on the head. Taking all this western land completely reopened the explosive debate on whether slavery would be permitted to expand into these newly conquered territories, requiring constant, tense negotiations just to keep the nation from splitting apart.
Section 3. The Fracturing Compromises, Visualizing the Divide.
So what exactly happens when an unstoppable economic engine meets an unmovable political boundary? Well, you get a series of desperate and ultimately doomed political compromises. The 1820 Missouri Compromise was the first major attempt to put a lid on the powder keg. It literally fractured the country along a geographic boundary, the 36-degree 30-minute line. It was a super fragile attempt to maintain political balance in Congress, admitting Missouri as a slave state and Maine as a free state, while declaring slavery forever prohibited north of that line. Former President Thomas Jefferson called this geographic split a firebell in the night, terrifyingly predicting it was the death knell of the Union.
The crucial takeaway here is that this was an irreconcilable ideological divide. Both sides firmly believed their economic survival and their constitutional liberties were under direct attack. The North wanted to prevent slavery's extension to preserve the West as a haven for independent, free white labor. Meanwhile, the South insisted they had a strict constitutional right to take their slave property anywhere, arguing that restricting slavery was a direct violation of their property rights. This divide was just impossible to manage, even with temporary band-aids like the Compromise of 1850, because neither side was willing to concede the future of the American West.
Then came the 1854 Kansas-Nebraska Act, which completely blew up all those previous boundaries. It essentially tossed out the old Missouri Compromise line and opened these vast new territories to popular sovereignty, meaning the settlers themselves would vote on whether to allow slavery. Rather than solving the issue, it prompted a massive rush of pro-slavery and anti-slavery settlers into Kansas. It sparked violent, bloody conflict as they quite literally fought for control of the territory's future. On top of that, the Supreme Court's later Dred Scott decision essentially ruled that Congress had no power to ban slavery in the territories at all. As you can imagine, that just threw gasoline on an already explosive situation.
Section 4. Radicals and Rebellions. The conflict ignites.
As political compromises totally broke down across the country, radicalization and direct action took center stage. And that brings us back to John Brown. His intense dedication really captures the face of a new, uncompromising radicalization, one that eventually culminated in his infamous armed raid on Harper's Ferry. For activists like Brown, polite political debate just wasn't going to cut it anymore. It was completely insufficient to combat the sheer physical violence baked into the institution of slavery. He and others like him were entirely willing to use force, believing that a system built on brutality could only be dismantled by direct militant action. This radicalization totally transformed the abolitionist movement. They abandoned those older, cautious ideas of gradual colonization. Instead, figures like David Walker and William Lloyd Garrison demanded immediate, unconditional emancipation. They deployed what they called moral suasion, compiling massive evidence from Southern court records to expose the horrors of the domestic slave trade, framing slavery as a heinous sin against God. And incredibly brave individuals took direct action by building the highly dangerous Underground Railroad, covertly funneling runaway slaves to freedom, something that absolutely infuriated Southern slaveholders.
Section 5. The Union dissolved. The final break. Let's see how all of this builds to the final stop on our historical roadmap, the total, catastrophic collapse of the United States. The results of the 1860 presidential election serve as clear, undeniable proof that the nation was completely, irreparably polarized by geography. Abraham Lincoln, representing a Republican Party opposed to the expansion of slavery into the West, won the presidency without securing a single Southern electoral vote. For white Southerners, Lincoln's victory was a massive red flag. It signaled that they had entirely lost control of the national government, and with it, the ability to protect their slave-based economy.
The immediate fallout was a rapid domino effect of secession. Before Lincoln even took the oath of office, Southern states began breaking away. The South absolutely refused to surrender its highly profitable system of human bondage to a Northern-dominated federal government.
And that brings us to the undeniable finality of South Carolina's 1860 Declaration from the Charleston Mercury, triumphantly announcing the Union is dissolved. That moment was the explosive detonation of the powder keg. Over half a century of relentless territorial expansion, the explosive growth of the cotton economy, failing political compromises, and deeply entrenched moral battles over human rights finally culminated in the complete fracturing of the nation.
Now, these weren't just isolated debates happening in some historical vacuum. The rhetoric, the intense activism, and the resistance that formed in the antebellum era laid the entire foundation for our modern civil rights landscape. So I want to leave you with this question to reflect on. How do the ripples of these 19th century ideological clashes over human rights, labor, and geography continue to shape our modern American struggles today? Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer, and I really hope this leaves you wanting to explore even more about the complex, fascinating roots of our history.